The Alpha King's enemy raised her. No one expected her to become his fated Luna. Instead, Ilara had never questioned where she came from. She grew up in a small, quiet town called Grey Hollow, far from the noise of the world, far from anything she could not understand. The streets were narrow, the shops were old, and the people knew each other by name. It was a peaceful life, a simple one, and to Ilara, it was the only life she had ever known. The woman who raised her was called Marin. She was small in size but large in presence, the kind of person who could silence a room just by walking into it. She ran a bakery on the corner of 2 streets, and she woke every morning before the sun did. Ilara grew up helping her knead dough, wrap loaves, and carry trays. She did not mind the early hours. She liked the warmth of the ovens and the smell of fresh bread. She liked knowing exactly what each day would bring. Marin never spoke about the past. If Ilara asked where she was born, or who her parents were, Marin would give her a gentle look, not unkind, but final, and change the subject. Ilara stopped asking after a while. Some doors, she learned, were not meant to be opened by her. But there were things she could not explain away so easily. She was faster than everyone in town, not by a little, by so much that it stopped feeling like a talent and started feeling like something else entirely. She could hear a whispered conversation from 3 rooms away. When she cut her hand on a bread knife at 17, the wound was gone by morning, not healed slowly, the way cuts usually do. Gone, as if it had never been there. She told herself it meant nothing. She told herself she was simply healthy, simply fit. She believed this for a long time, because believing it was easier than the alternative. Marin died in the spring, 2 weeks after Ilara turned 21. She did not die suddenly. She had been fading for months, her hair turning white faster than age could explain, her hands shaking in the early mornings, her eyes growing distant in a way that frightened Ilara more than any illness could. The night before she passed, Marin called Ilara to her bedside and pressed something into her palm. It was a small iron locket, old and heavy, with a design on its face that Ilara did not recognize. "Keep this," Marin said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do not open it yet, but keep it close." "What is it?" Ilara asked. "A beginning," Marin said. Then she closed her eyes and did not open them again. Ilara buried her on a gray morning, with only 3 neighbors present. She stood at the grave for a long time after they left, holding the locket in her hand, feeling the weight of a silence she did not know how to fill. She was alone now, completely and truly alone. 2 weeks later, they came. She heard them before she saw them, a sound like large animals moving through the alley behind the bakery, too heavy and too fast to be anything ordinary. She stepped outside with a lantern and found 2 large wolves standing in the dark, their eyes catching the light in a way that made her chest tighten. Then, from behind them, a man appeared from the shadows. He was tall and broad, with the kind of stillness that suggested he was used to being in charge. He looked at her with sharp, dark eyes and said, very calmly, "There is a rogue shifter in this town. It is dangerous. You need to get inside." Ilara looked at the wolves. She looked at the man. She looked at the alley. Then she picked up a cast iron pan from just inside the doorway and said, "Tell me where it is." The man blinked. That, clearly, was not what he expected. What happened next lasted less than 4 minutes. The rogue shifter came tearing around the corner, and Ilara threw the pan with a precision she could not have explained even to herself. It caught the creature across the side of the head with enough force to stun it long enough for the 2 wolves to bring it down. By the time it was over, Ilara was standing in the middle of the alley, breathing hard, still holding the handle of the pan. The man stared at her. "You are not human," he said. "I live alone, and I run a bakery," she replied. "I am extremely human." He did not argue with her then. He told her his name was Rhett, that he served under someone called the Alpha King, and that Grey Hollow was going to fall under a new protection arrangement that would require her cooperation. She told him she did not cooperate with people who showed up uninvited. He left. She bolted the door. He came back in the morning with documents. The documents were official, detailed, and deeply irritating. Grey Hollow was now a neutral zone under Ironvale Pact jurisdiction. As a resident, she was required to register with Pact authorities. If she refused, she would be formally detained for investigation. She stared at the papers for a long time, Then she packed a bag and got in the vehicle he was waiting with outside. She told herself it was only temporary. Iron Vale's territory was nothing like Grey Hollow. It was large and organized, with wide roads and tall stone buildings that looked like they had been standing for centuries. The people moved differently here, with a kind of awareness that reminded Alara of the way animals moved in open fields, always slightly tuned to something just beyond normal sight. She was given a room in the outer ward, and assigned a liaison named Sable, a young woman with quick eyes and an easy smile, who explained things without being condescending about it. Sable told her about pack structure, about the Alpha King, about the way things worked here. Alara listened carefully and kept her questions specific. What she did not ask about, but noticed, was the way people looked at her. Not with suspicion, not with hostility, with something she could not name at first, until she placed it. It was the same look people gave important things they were not sure how to treat yet. She did not understand it. She filed it away. She met the Alpha King by accident. She had been looking for Sable in the eastern corridor, and had turned down the wrong hallway, and opened the wrong door, and suddenly she was standing in a room full of people who all went completely silent at the same moment. At the head of the table sat a man who was clearly used to rooms going silent when he entered them. He was not what she had imagined. She had built him up in her mind as something cold and unreachable. He was composed, certainly, and his eyes, when they landed on her, were very still, but they were not empty. He looked at her the way a person looks at something they thought they had prepared for, and had not. "You turned down the wrong hall," he said. "I noticed," she replied. "Can someone point me toward the east corridor?" He dismissed the room. Everyone filed out. He waited until they were alone, and then he said, very quietly, "You were raised by Marin." The sound of that name in his voice stopped her cold. "How do you know that name?" she asked. He told her. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. He told her that she was not from Grey Hollow, that she was not fully human, that the locket she wore had belonged to people who were connected to a war that had ended before she could walk. She left that room with her heart hammering and her face completely still. In the weeks that followed, she went to the archives. He had given her access. She had asked for it formally, through Sable, and he had granted it without explanation. She worked through the records slowly and carefully, the way Marin had taught her to do everything, one step, then the next. What she found reshaped everything she thought she knew. Her bloodline was not simply the enemy's bloodline. It was more complicated and more painful than that. Her parents had not wanted the war. They had tried to stop it. They had walked toward Iron Vale with open hands and had been caught in the collapse of something they had not started. The war had been the sin of one man, her grandfather, and it had swallowed her parents along with everything else. Caden knew this. He had known it for years. When she went to him with what she had found, she did not shout. She was too tired for anger. She simply stood in front of him and asked why. Why he had kept her alive. Why he had placed her with Marin. Why he had watched from a distance, while she grew up believing she was no one. He told her the truth. "Because you were innocent," he said, "and I was exhausted from punishing innocent people for things they did not choose." She looked at him for a long time after that. She was looking for something dishonest in the answer, and did not find it. The bond between them announced itself at a pack gathering 3 weeks later. She had been brought to observe, Sable beside her, whispering quiet explanations. It was a formal ceremony, full of ritual and tradition that Alara did not yet fully understand. She was watching the proceedings carefully when Caden walked in. He scanned the hall the way he always did, quickly, thoroughly, out of habit, and his eyes found hers. Everything went very still. She felt something shift, like a key turning in a lock she had not known existed. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was simply true, the way very important things often are, quiet and certain and impossible to argue with. Around them, every wolf in the hall had gone motionless. Sable touched her arm gently and whispered, "That just happened." "What just happened?" Alara asked. "Something very rare," Sable said, and her voice was unsteady in the best possible way. The council did not accept it quietly. There were objections, formal, structured ones, delivered by people who had lost family in the old war, and carried that loss like a stone in their chest. She understood them. She did not dismiss them. When she was brought before the council to answer for her bloodline, she stood straight and spoke simply. She said, "I did not choose where I came from. I cannot undo what my grandfather did. What I can do is choose what I do next. I am not asking you to forget the past. I am asking you to let me be something the past did not produce." Caden said nothing during her speech. He did not need to. When she finished, he stood up and closed the matter in 4 words. The months that followed were not effortless. Trust was built slowly, the way all real things are, through small moments, through showing up, through not pretending to be something she was not. She made mistakes. She learned. She advocated for the families in the outer wards who had been overlooked in resource allocation. She helped mediate a border disagreement that had been building toward something worse. She burned a ceremonial dinner once and laughed about it openly, which somehow did more for her standing than anything formal had. One evening, late in the autumn, she sat by the window of her study with the locket open in her palm. She had opened it finally, carefully, slowly, and found inside it 2 names she now recognized from the archive records, her parents, and beneath them, in smaller writing, a single line she had to hold the locket close to the light to read. "May she live in a world worth living in." She sat with those words for a long time. Caden came in quietly and sat beside her. He looked at the locket and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed to be said. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, the packed territory was settling into night. Fires lit, families gathered, the ordinary sounds of a world going on. Ilara listened to it, and felt, for the first time in her life, that she was not outside of something looking in. She was exactly where she was supposed to be. Not because of her bloodline, not because of a bond or a title or anything that had been decided for her before she could speak, but because she had chosen to stay, and that, she had learned, was the most powerful thing a person could ever do.